Hey, how you doing? Hey, winter is over and summer is just around the corner, and that means the wood shop is back open for business. And it's time to get started on that electric guitar project I promised you. Okay, this guitar project, I really need to build a prototype. I'm not one that usually does a lot of prototyping, and for a project such as this, it could be expensive. But fortunately for me, building the prototype, a lot of the stuff that I'm going to use on this guitar, I can use on the actual project down the road. So for this episode, I'm going to walk you through some basic guitar building steps and share with you what I learned, because I've never done this before. So it's going to be an interesting project. Now, a number of years ago, I built this replacement body for my Jackson electric guitar, which I've had forever. And I did some things right, I did some things wrong, and I learned quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a neck for this guitar, or neck for this body, put it all together, and just try to do a dry run before I spend a good amount of money on some quality lumber. I want to make sure I do this right, if at all possible. So I did that, so the body's done. And I went ahead and ordered some quarter sawn mahogany for the neck. Now, I doubt you're going to be able to see this, but this piece of lumber is not quarter sawn. I'm pretty disappointed. It's kind of quarter sawn. The grain actually goes diagonally, so I'm a bit disappointed in that. What are you going to do? So, if you're familiar with my pool table episode, you understand that I'm a big fan of laminations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rip this piece in half, flip it around, and glue it back together so that I have grain going this way and this way. It should stabilize the neck wonderfully. And to make it look better and add a little bit more rigidity, in the middle I'm going to put a little strip of black walnut, which coincidentally happens to be, which will happen to be the same width as my truss rod. So that should make making a slot for my truss rod really simple. All right, I got my neck pieces all laminated together, and it looks really nice. I've also taken the time to make a piece of headstock material. I decided to make my neck in two pieces, the neck part and then the headstock. I think this is going to be a much stronger joint this way, and besides that, it also makes it easier for me to use power tools when milling everything else. So that's why I did it that way. Now, I'm really glad I decided to build this prototype for one reason. I made this strip out of black walnut. The body top is maple, and the rest of the body is mahogany. Consequently, my headstock is mahogany with a thin strip of maple. It kind of nice to tie in the maple mahogany theme throughout the back. I'll do that on the real build, so you learn something. So I got my slot for my truss rod here, and I've got my headstock glued, and now I just need to figure out how to get this slot to go through here. In a perfect world, I'd love to have just a hole for an access point for the truss rod. I don't really know how I can drill a hole in that slot, that area precisely, so I guess what I'm going to have to do is just continue to route this out, and if it looks terrible, we'll just cover it up with an access cover later. If it looks good, I'll leave it blank, see how I like it. So I'm going to start working on that, and so far, things are coming together really nice. All right, I got my cavity finished routing for the truss rod, and it looks like crap, so I'm going to have to cover it up with an access cover. That's fine. I kind of expected to do that anyway. I got the basic shape of my headstock that I wanted all cut out, sanded smooth, looking good. Now it's time to actually install the truss rod and actually glue the fingerboard. Now I have checked to make sure this is perfectly flat up and down with a straight edge, and it looks fantastic. It's coming out really nice. I'm pretty happy so far. Now, I could have just ordered fingerboard wood and ordered a saw blade to the right dimension, to the right thickness, so I could cut these slots, but for an extra $1 or $2 to get it all pre-radiused and pre-slotted, I think it was worth it, and it'll make things a whole lot simpler. So, a little tip I found out, if you put a little silicone in your truss rod slot, it may help reduce vibrations, or in case so the truss rod won't have the potential to rattle on you. So why not? It can't hurt, right? I'll make sure I get up all the excess, so I don't want any silicone where my wood glue is going to go. All right, time to glue. I'm just using my nut as a guide so I know how far that has to go. That looks good. This end of the fingerboard gets cut off, so I'm actually going to tack a brad to keep everything from moving. And then to the familiar problem of limited clamps. All right, let that dry. All right, I got my fingerboard all glued on. It's out of the clamps. It's a nice tight seam. Should be really, really nice. And while I was waiting for that to dry, I spent some time with some Forms B's furniture finish remover, and I removed most of the finish on this body. I still got some more scraping and sanding to do, but there's plenty of time for that. So now what I'm going to do is, what I've done, I've laid out with some tape the dimensions for the taper on my neck, and so I'd like to do that on the bandsaw, but because it won't sit flat because the headstock is on, I'm going to temporarily glue some sacrificial pieces of pine with hot glue, and that way I can run these through the bandsaw that way. And I will make sure I stay away from the edge, and I will fine tune that with a file later. Well, the tapering job on the bandsaw turned out very nice. I made certain to stay clear of that line, so I have plenty of space to work with. And I decided that before I remove my sacrificial blocks, and I still have a nice consistently thick piece, I decided to go ahead and mark the spots for my sights, and I'll go ahead and drill those in the drill press before I remove and start working on the taper. Should make things a little bit easier. And the sights I decided to use are just these little round sights. I'm not going to get overly complicated on this project with some detailed inlay. I may do that on the final build, but we'll see. All right, I got the recess holes all drilled for my sights. Now I'm just going to use some epoxy to set them in. I'm using epoxy versus wood glue because I believe that epoxy is better at filling gaps than wood glue is. So that's why I'm doing it, and I'll just take my time and it should work out wonderfully. Well, things are moving along nicely. I got my sights all glued in, and I will say I made a mistake. The sights that I've put on my 12th fret are a little deep, so I'm going to have to figure out a way to raise it up with some filler, or maybe get some more sights and just glue another one in top. I don't know yet. I haven't figured that out yet, but for now, it's good. And for last day, I have spent some time with, well, I cut the initial taper for the thickness of the neck on the bandsaw. Then for the last little while, I have been spending some time with a rasp, a small hand plane, and some sandpaper, getting the shape of my neck all the way I like it. And really, I didn't use much in the way of a guide, as just what felt good to me. And I did a pretty good job. It looks very nice. So now it's time to actually drill the holes for my peg heads. And I also spent some time modifying the cavity of my body here so that the neck will fit in here properly. It fits very nice, and it's actually starting to look like a guitar. And I've already drilled the holes for the mounting plate. And on the next project, I'm actually going to do a glue-in neck. But I couldn't do that with this project because the body was already built. So everything's coming together wonderfully. Now, one thing I did mess up on, or I guess another thing I messed up on, is that before I forgot about the sights for the top of the neck, or the side of the neck, if you will. And I would have loved to have drilled those while I had a whole stock. So because it's going to be very difficult to do that, so I'll have to figure that out later. But it shouldn't be that big a deal. They're small, and any excess gaps can be filled with filler, right? The magic stuff of filler. Got my tuning machines installed, and they fit great, and they look good too. And I have started to actually insert frets. And I did learn that you have to pre-bend your fret wire before you put it in, otherwise it won't lay. You'll squeeze it in and it'll pop back out. So I've gone ahead and pre-bent all my fret wire, cleaned it with some acetone, and I am inserting the fret wire carefully with some glue. Oh, before I do that, on the bandsaw, I took a block of walnut and I mounted it into a board, anchored it in a pivot, and ran it through at 12 inches. So I have a radius block that is the same radius as my fingerboard, which in this case is 12 inches. It worked great. Consequently, I also have a piece that I've cut a slot in that I could use as a guide to help bend my fret wire to the proper radius. Worked great. So back to the glue. You can buy all sorts of fancy tools that'll help you do this. You can just make your own radius block and use a clamp and squeeze it in. And I also learned that you got to cut your frets a little bit longer than you want, because when you squeeze them with the dikes, they actually disform. So we'll go and we'll file them all off later once they're all installed. But it's looking good, looking really good. Well, I've gotten a lot done, and I got my frets all installed, and they came out okay. I did not do a good enough job pre-bending the fret wire. My thought process was that I just needed to be close. I was wrong. I kind of thought that the tangs on the frets would get into the grooves and hold, even if the bending wasn't perfect. I was wrong. Some of the frets are sitting up a little bit, and I probably should go back and redo them. If this were the actual project, I would for sure, but because this is just a prototype, I'm not. I'm just going to leave them be. I filed them all flat and smooth. They're true. My neck is still perfectly straight, and I did string it up, and there is just a slight relief. Now, I understand that probably after some time, that relief may increase a little bit. That's okay. That's why we got a truss rod in here. We can adjust that later. But so I should go back and crown these frets off later, because the ones up here are a little thin. I got my side sights done. I just took my time, made sure I didn't go too deep, and they came out pretty good. My double on the 12th here is a little crooked, but it's a prototype, remember? Oh well. I also spent some time carving out the nut. I used bone for that, and I did a lot of time with sandpaper, file, and some nut files that I got specifically for this job, and they worked great. That's looking good. Neck is all profiled properly. I just spent time with a file and some planes, and it looks pretty good. And I've already applied some grain filler here, and I tell you what, the mahogany is just beautiful. My original thought was I'm going to spray color on the whole thing. I decided that I want to see the mahogany itself, so I'm just going to put clear on that. I'm also just going to put clear on the back of the body, and then I'll put color on the top. I've already spent my time removing all the finish, the old finish. I've done a lot of sanding, did some more work with profiling, doing a better job than I did many years ago when I first made this body, and it's looking fine. I'm really happy with how this thing's turning out. So now we're ready to actually start putting some color on here, and the color I chose is a shade of green, and a friend of mine suggested that I do green. Thanks, Mike. And so we're going to try it. I'm not a very good, I've never done any spray finishing before. This is going to be an interesting process. I have no idea how this is going to work, but we're going to find out. So again, the back and the neck, I'm going to keep just the mahogany, and on the top, I want the color. So I've gone ahead and taped off the top of my body, and I've taped off my headstock. We'll make those match. Also, decided that I needed to cover up this slot because it looks terrible, and it does look terrible. So I kind of thought a nice piece of end-grained black walnut with a clear finish on it would look great. So I carved one out, put some clear finish on it, and I think it looks nice. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this is all going to look when it's all put together. But so far, we're moving along nicely. Well, I've got myself a small spray gun. It's a touch-up gun. It was relatively inexpensive, and I don't have any idea how well this is going to work. The instructions that came with this thing were pretty thin. There's a lot of adjustments on here, and we'll see how it goes. But I had some options when I was ordering some dye. I could get just a green, or I could do some sort of combination of blue and yellow. I didn't know which would work better, so I went ahead and got all three. And after doing some test pieces, it turns out the bright green color all by itself I think will work perfectly. So that's what I'm going to use. And again, I'm using a water-based lacquer for this. I have a test piece of maple here, and I'm going to do some sample sprays on there before I go to my actual guitar body. I don't know how much overspray this is going to cause, and I don't want to get all my stuff covered with green lacquer. So I'm going to try to do this. I got as much covered as I possibly can, and I'm probably not going to show you that process because I don't want my camera to get lacquer on it. I think you can understand that, me being all frugal and stuff. Normally I'd probably put something down on my table to protect it, but an idea I got from Spagnuolo was to, when I built my table, to put a sacrificial piece of 1/4-inch Luan on here, or hardboard on here, and that's what I did. So if it gets stains and finish on it, I don't really care. I can rip it up and replace later. Thanks, Mark. Well, the first coat of finish came out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I think I got a little heavy at times, and I have a run here and a little bit of run here and a little bit of, I don't know what you want to call it, a little bit of pooling maybe. So I'll need to spend some time with some sandpaper once this dries. Fortunately, this lacquer dries really fast, so I probably won't have to wait for more than an hour or so to do that. But I think the color is a good choice. It's looking very nice, and the amount of overspray was minimal. And using this water-based stuff for such a small project is working out great because it's really easy to clean up. Just a bucket of water or a hose is all you need to get everything spick and span and clean and ready to go for round 2. So, looking good. Color coats are looking really good. Pretty happy. Although I wish it was a little bit, maybe a lighter green, more of a candy apple green. I might shoot it with a layer of yellow and see what happens. Worst case scenario, I always wipe or sand it off, right? But so far so good, looking good, pretty happy. Well, the finish came out pretty good. Overall, I'm pretty happy with it, and it came out pretty nice. I put everything together, I got it all wired up, and it actually plays very, very well. It sounds great. Pickups I chose turned out very, very well. Again, the fret job is probably not the best, and I'll definitely improve on that when I actually start building the actual project. And I got the wood. It's been sitting in the shop for a couple weeks now, just acclimating to the wonderful Michigan climate. There's a couple things. When I did the neck and I put the sanding sealer on it, I really liked the natural color of the mahogany, and I was pretty happy with it. But because I have two different kinds of mahogany, in case you didn't know, most of the mahogany you buy is not really mahogany at all. It's just a similar wood. I don't know all the details on it, but it's a similar wood that has the same characteristics of mahogany, but it's not actual mahogany. So my point is, I have two different kinds for the body and the neck, and there's a slight color variation, and it's a little light for me. I'd like it to be a little bit darker. So on the real guitar, I'm going to do something different with this stain. So as you can see, I put color on the top, on the maple, and just left the mahogany naked. And it looks okay. It looks fine. I could probably use about another 10 coats of finish, and I definitely need to do a better job on the next one, actually finish sanding, because I can see some sand marks through the finish. I also will need to do a better job of filling the grain. This bird's eye maple has a lot of pots in it, and I didn't do a very good job of filling those. But it really, overall, it looks nice. I'm just really nitpicking here. The headstock is a little small. When I first put it together and I carved out the shape, I didn't like it. It was too small. It just, in the body, with the body, to me, it looked like it was too big. But actually, the more and more I look at it, the more and more I really kind of like it. But there's a couple issues with the headstock. Now, when I designed this headstock, my goal was to have the strings go straight so they wouldn't be bending all over the place to get to the pegs. So I laid out on a piece of paper where I wanted my pegs to go, and then I just kind of designed this shape around that. But the issue I have is if you look here, you'll see that the tuning pegs go this way. Ideally, I would have liked them to come off of each side parallel, like this. But because I put my pegs so close, my top two pegs so close together, they're touching. So this peg will not go up. So I ended up having to, put them on kind of a kitty-wampus angle. And actually, it looks kind of cool that way, but it's not really what I want. So I'm going to have to make the headstock a little bit longer and maybe a little bit wider. We'll see. Pretty happy with how this turned out, and I learned so much doing this. And like I said before, I'm not much into doing a lot of prototyping, but I think in this case it was important to do it and learn. The nut, I overcooked the nut on the 5th string a little bit, so it's a little lower than I would like, but it's really only a minor issue, and I have more nut material. I can redo that if I like. I may actually just buy a pre-made nut next time just to make things a little bit easier. Nah, no, I won't. I'll do it myself. So there it is. That's the prototype. Oh, one more thing. I made a control cavity cover out of a thin piece of maple, and it came out pretty well. When I first put finish on it, it actually grew about 1/4 of an inch. I couldn't believe how much it expanded. But I went out of town for work, and when I came back, it shrunk back down to size, so it fit perfectly, so I was very happy about that. So overall, not too shabby. A good first effort, but the next one I'll definitely take more time on, and we will make it pretty. So we'll start that very soon. Thanks.